I'd like to expand on what you just said about the universality of trauma. I think this is one thing that really touched me in the book. When you first sent me the manuscript, it wasn't packaged in this beautiful cover. And I remember, just because I was coming to it from a journalism point of view, imagining it being sold as a sort of, journalist's story. And I was quite surprised when your publishers decided to package it like this. And then now, of course, I've got used to it. And I can see the wisdom in what they've done. They've universalized the story, yes, which I think is genius, because in fact, what you're talking about, the impact on the families, is very, very similar for anyone struggling with trauma and PTSD, no matter how they experienced it. I've never actually reported from a war zone or a conflict zone, but I grew up in a household with a mother who was diagnosed with PTSD. She also wasn't a journalist or had any similar experience, but the impact is the same. And so it's not just a journalist's problem. It's not just the duty of care of an employer to their employees. It's just the management of the society, of our health as a whole. The knock-on effect is just so huge. Family breakup is always cited as a real cause for society's problems, and the lack of strong bonds and human bonds, and the growing rates of loneliness. I just see it all as being tied in together. And Mary, you must have seen lots of parallels between how you were trying to support refugees and what Dean was trying to do with helping people come to terms with how they were dealing with their trauma. It sounds like the familiarity with that trauma landscape helped you, made sense of your home life. Was there anything else that helped you cope with the difficulties in your marriage at that time? I mean, frankly, some of the episodes in the book just made me think, God, anyone else would have been out of there.
I had also worked in family violence. So I knew that you didn't have to go to war to be in a war zone, that a war zone could be next door, it could be in your own home. So I had done, I'd worked in a women's refuge. So I thought I knew a lot. Sorry, what was your question?
I think your close friendships really helped you as well, didn't they? The supports that you had with our close friends.
Yes.
One of the things that really helped Mary was we had some really close friends, and Mary was able to have close conversations with them without me.
Yeah.
And they were an amazing support to Mary, that she could just channel her. Mary was able to channel her frustrations and anger to them without me present, whether it was WhatsApp conversations or they would come and visit us.
But also you still had to put on this persona when you went to work, when you were with a lot of other different people, that because you wanted to be the same. You didn't want to be the woman who lived in a domestic war zone whose husband was ill, and you didn't want to be that either. So gosh, it's a long time since it happened, but it still feels like yesterday.
Especially because it took 7 years to write the book, so I'd sometimes go to Mary and say, can we just talk about that time when, and I'd be like, no, it didn't happen like that. Yes. And so that resulted in, I guess we would sometimes have different versions of events, which was interesting. But that was I guess that's how you have different memories of things, right? I'd remember it from my perspective. Mary would remember it from her perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because Dean's written a book about a war zone and trauma in a war zone, but we are learning more and more about the war zones in our own communities. And I hope that the parallels there are not lost.
Yeah.
So many of us have experienced childhood trauma. And that, you know, childhood trauma stays with you for the rest of your life. It shapes you. And I hope that people who have experienced childhood trauma or any sort of trauma are able to get something from this book, because I think it really speaks to that as well. You know, that having to, you know, try and be tough. I think that people are only just starting to speak in the past, you know, few years about childhood trauma. We're starting to have these conversations.
And people are also just starting to speak about generational trauma, which of course, both of which are inextricably linked with war zones. War zones create childhood trauma and generational trauma. And I was at a very interesting workshop recently where a journalist who started out his life as a soldier and then became a journalist after the war in Bosnia. They're now 20 years after the war, still struggling with the fallout, and inviting journalists from countries currently in conflict to come and report from the future, as he says, by seeing what's happening in Bosnia when 20 years later, the war criminals have done their time, they're out of prison, they're now back in the society. How the heck do you handle all that? You've got to live with them. So the trauma certainly does. I mean, I think it's encouraging to see how much more education and understanding there is about trauma in different places, areas of life. What we hear regularly at the Rory Peck Trust with journalists applying to us for support grants to pay for therapy. We have a support fund where we can give journalists grants to start them off on therapy and start them on the road and cover 3 months of treatment so that they can see whether it works for them. And what surprised us is that initially we thought journalists would come to us with their chosen therapists and we would help with the financial burden. Journalists don't know how to find a therapist and now screaming out for educated clinicians who understand the world of journalism, the pressures of the newsroom and all of that. Like you said, Dean, doing 24-hour news is not, is a very different place to be. It's probably more akin to, I don't know, where, you know, to first responders really, and that kind of pressure. And you know, it's interesting that you said earlier, your first experience of a psychiatrist didn't work so well for you and you had to keep going until you found the right one. And I think that's a really important message to remind people, just because you don't find the silver bullet in your first meeting with a psychiatrist, don't give up. You know, if you've looked into this part, there must be a reason. Something is leading you to getting help. Just keep going until you find the right support. And luckily, there are fantastic initiatives in America and through the Dart Center where they are educating clinicians in understanding the role of journalists and how journalists work and operate and what makes them tick. And we've, at the Rory Peck Trust, gathered quite a large pool of clinicians that understand journalists, which is great. Mary, you said, I can't help but think that one of the great advantages that your couple had was that you understood journalism. You'd been there, you'd done the journalism yourself, not just as a day-to-day journalist, but reporting from hostile environments yourself and conflict zones yourself. Did you feel that gave you an advantage for Dean? Did that help save your marriage, if you like?
Yes, because I think in his eyes, I was able to speak the language I needed to, and I had the credibility also because I had been in conflict zones. I had taken risks. I'd been a freelancer. So I was able to turn around and say, you know, I've been there. And also I had recognized the symptoms myself. Sometimes if you're a freelancer, you're working twice as hard because you want to be hired again for the next story. So I was coming home from long stretches away. So I felt that I did have some credibility there to be able to say, look, I know there is something wrong.
He wasn't able to say, you just don't understand.
Oh yes, no, he was. So, but I was able to counter that. You know, okay, I hadn't been in, you know, a war in the war in Iraq or in Aceh, but trauma is trauma, and
and you'd had significant experience working with cameramen who'd covered the war in Bosnia, for example, and
yes, and I'd seen how traumatized they were. I could see that sort of self-destruction and around me.
The self-destruction is definitely a pattern.